Today I'm interviewing Milton Fairclough, affectionately known as Snow Fairclough, a member of the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion, and he will be telling us about his experiences as a soldier in Syria and on Java, and then whilst on Java he became a prisoner of war, and there will be some comments about his time as a prisoner of war on Java, then movement through Singapore to go to Thailand, and whilst he was in Thailand he was up on the Burma-Thailand railway at camps which you'll hear about. But what is quite interesting is that Snow at the end of the war was in a camp in, I'll call it southern Thailand, called Champphon, and which there is very little known about. So Snow, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview today, and maybe if you could tell us, before you were sent overseas, where did you undergo training?
Did our training, we joined up in June 1940, went to Northern, our first camp. Previous to that I had a 1 month and a 3 month camp at the 25th Light Horse, and that was with Vickers, so we knew a fair drop about Vickers, and we joined what was originally the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion while we were in Northern, but the name, eventually we became the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion. We trained in Northern, and after a few months we were sent to South Australia. We went over on the trans train as first class people. We didn't go in cattle trucks like some of the ones later, and we were waited on by people in white coats and what have you. Come over there, we went to a couple of camps in South Australia, Woodside, Warradale mainly. All the other, the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion was made up of 2 South Australian companies. B Company was Victoria, D Company West Australia, and C Company was Tasmania, so we were pretty cosmopolitan mob. We were trained pretty well over in South Australia. I think on exercises we shot up most of various coastal places we trained at, did a hell of a lot of night training in South Australia. Overall, we thought we'd be A1 to go away, and we're pretty anxious to get mobile and go overseas. Most of us had never ever sort of been outside of Moora, my hometown, more or less. Like, I think we were sent back to West Australia again on the trans train for invocation leave.
Where were you actually positioned when you got into Perth, or were you still at Northern?
Yeah, we had, I think, 14 days or something invocation leave, and we went back to Northern. We were only there very few days, and we were trained down to metropolitan area and onto Fremantle, where we joined a boat called the Ile-de-France. It was a boat that had been recently sabotaged, but they said they had it back in gear, but unfortunately it was quite a few things didn't work on it, particularly the sewage. We were down on D-Deck, the Don Company, had a good trip across, and came to Suez, and then we went down by rail to a place called Alcantara. That's where I first reckoned that the Pommy Naffy canteens and that were extra good. The food and everything was very good at Alcantara. We enjoyed that. Eventually finished up back down, trained down, and we finished up in Palestine. Was there a few months. The first day that we loved, I always remember our Colonel Lynham, took us on a route march out to the Mediterranean to have a swim, and Mum and Dad had given me a nice Rolex watch before I left, and I remember I couldn't swim, but I had Eddie Sleeber, one of our boys, teaching me that day, and he reckoned I'd defied every law of buoyancy. But I still had my watch on, and I panicked because I thought it wouldn't be any good after that, but it still kept going right through till it was sold to the Japanese on Java. Anyway, we trained there for a few months, and eventually we thought we may be going up the desert, but we finished up, went up to Syria and Lebanon to fight against the Vichy French. On our passage up there, I remember one thing, that as usual we're pretty short of spares for our vicars, and one of the places we stopped at, we'd had a lecture from one of our intelligence officers not to touch anything or anything we found that was left by the retreating froggies. It could be booby trap, we were told not to touch them. And I remember there was an old First War Vickers at one of the places we stopped at, and Gordon Roberts and I decided that looking at it, it looked the same, the condenser can that we were short of, and the condenser can lead and the muzzle attachment on the front. So we both made a grab. He went for the can, I went for the muzzle attachment, and there was a hell of an explosion, and we thought, oh geez, it's booby trap, but it was our own artillery in the valley behind us firing over at the froggies. We were very careful from then on, I can tell you.
When you were in that area, were you consistently in contact with the enemy?
No, we hadn't had contact with them then. We eventually were taken up with, I forget the name of the mountain, but we're in Lebanon, and we got to the top of the mountain down near midnight. It was as black as hell when we got up there, and the first thing we noticed when we got to the top of the hill was a Salvation man up there with a couple of spirit stoves, and he had a big urn of either hot tea or hot coffee. And I thought to myself at later times, how the hell would he know that we were up there? I would have thought it was very secret, but I always think, and ever since then I've had a thing about Salvation Army, they're good blokes.
The Sally Man.
Sally Man, yeah. Anyway, we had to go from there to sort of a little orchard, had a lot of fig trees and things in, right at the top of this damn mountain that we got to, but getting over to where we were going to dig our trenches and put our vicars down, we had to go through one of our own minefields. And I always remember asking the sapper chap that was taking us, I said, you know, these mines that we're liable to tread on, how much pressure have we got to put on them? And he said, oh, they're pretty light. He said, about the thickness of a French letter. I always remember that, and I got to the stage I was frightened to put my foot down.
I'm sure.
We had our hand on the shoulder of the bloke in front, so we all stepped exactly the same of it. And anyway, we got through the minefield and went over. We had, in the dark, we dug our L trenches and what have you, and we have a night firing program, sort of. You've got a light well over on the left of your machine gun, which we used to sight on, which always amazed me. And Flippin, our colonel, knew exactly where these Vichy had their artillery guns, and apparently they had some of them in caves and had the guns on rails, and they used to bring them out at dawn and shell hell out of us and then take them back in. So, but we knew the area that they were coming out of the caves in, and that's where our machine guns were on, and dawn came around and we got hell bombarded out of us. I remember I had a lot of bits and pieces of fig trees falling all over me at one stage, and I was getting rather cross because a lot of the hot shells from our gun that I was number 2 on, and Twiddle was firing flat out all the time. And I remember standing up screaming and yelling at the froggies for being so-and-sos, and somebody pulled me down quick and said there could be snipers around, and I just had to stay down alongside the gun to keep the belt going, so there were no stoppages. We did that for quite a few mornings, and then we moved a bit further out towards the coast, and we finished up behind the 2nd 16th, who were in front of us. I think they were one of our crack infantry battalions from WA. And I remember at the Moor, which was a river crossing where they had to get across, and it was, I think they lost a lot of men there too, but we fired quite a lot over the heads of the 16th going down. And I always remember the Moor was a pretty hectic place. We were under fire quite a bit there. Occasionally, actually on the first place we were at, the froggies had 2 planes that came over and dropped a few bombs. The only casualty that we finished up with at the first firing against us, we had one of our blokes called Nigger Wilkes, and strange enough he was injured in the buttocks, so we reckon he must have been running away. He was the only one that I can remember from there. And the 2nd 16th after Demore, they went a bit further down. I think it was Waddy something or other, I just forget the name of the place. They had a fair bit of trouble with too, but eventually, but I don't know how many rounds we got over, but we would have fired quite a lot there. Another thing I remember is we didn't do a hell of a lot in the daytime. It was normally quite a lot of night firing we had in dawn in the early hours most times, but I remember we used to leave our, taking turns to leave our bloody machine guns and go a bit higher up and look down on the coast, and they apparently decided, seeing they weren't doing much good against these froggy artillery that used to go in and out of the caves, and they decided to send the Navy up and sort of shift the hill. I always remember when the Perth came up, and she just about did shift the hill. I remember Evan Hall going up and having a look there, and there were quite a few from a few of the black blokes that were in with the Vichy French, that I think they were Foreign Legion blokes from what we'd been told later on, and quite a few of them had gold teeth, and Hall used to go up on the motorbike and say, I'm going to knock the teeth out of these blokes, get some gold out of them. But I was interested when the Perth came up, because I'd never seen a warship or anything like that, and the froggies sent their 2 planes down and started dropping a few bombs around the Perth, and they had, I think they called them flying onions, both the guns, and they had to put all these flying onions up in the air, and they didn't actually hit either of the planes, but nothing happened to the Perth and nothing happened to the planes, so it was pretty tame actually after. But for us blokes that had never seen anything like that, it was pretty good to watch. But the actual Syrian campaign, the rest of our battalion, we stretched right across the Syria-Lebanon, we went right from our coastal thing right over to Damascus and Baalbek, right through there, and particularly the sea company, our Tasmanians, I don't know whether Flip had a bit of a thing against them, but they always seemed to get all the roughest spots. Sea mob, they were, I think, and right throughout the Syrian campaign, they had most casualties, and they had the hottest spots to work in right through, and even later on the actions that we had in Java, they were, poor old sea company were out in front again. But after the stoush with the Vichy French had finished, I think it lasted 30 or 31 days, and we were then put to work building big pillboxes, digging up the mountains and putting pillboxes in. They were pretty damn big and a lot of hard yakka. Apparently the rumour was that Hitler was going to take Turkey, come down and take Syria and Lebanon and get stuck into the Middle East. But luckily I think there was a Barbarossa action or something or other, that when Hitler decided to have a go at the Russians, and he had more to worry about than coming down and getting in the Middle East. So all the work we did on the pillboxes was more or less for naught, because they would never be used. We had a hell of a lot of leave, I remember too, at that time, and particularly us Moora blokes, we used to stick together on leave, and we went back after the war had finished, particularly to Baalbek and Damascus, and went right through Syria and Lebanon. Up in Egypt, we went to Cairo on one leave, and saw quite a lot of the country and quite a lot of the biblical stuff back at Palestine. But being young and adventurous, we didn't do half the things that I think back in later life we should have been doing. Anyway, we came back eventually from Syria and Lebanon back to Palestine. We were at Hill 69, all our kit bags and gear we had all repainted, and our trucks were all put all different signage on, and we were apparently going up to the desert to help up in the desert. But bang, the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor, and of course everything changed then. We were then told that we wouldn't be going up the desert, that we'd probably be going back home to fight against the Japanese in the islands. We came out of Hill 69, went to Palestine. From Palestine we were going up to Suez to catch the boat, and the engine broke down, and we had a spell of about 6 odd hours before they got the engine going again. So by the time we got up to Suez, the whole rest of the convoy had gone, and all our machine guns and ordnance and every other thing, and our kit bags and everything else had gone, and the only ship that was in there was the Orchids. And I think the commander of that was a bloke called Cox, and we were told that he was due to sail at such and such a time, and that was it. So we got on board with just what we stood up in, and we had no kit bags, no nothing sort of with us. Everything else was on.
But you had your rifles with you, did you? Just your small arms? Or maybe not.
No, I can't remember. No, I think we didn't have. No.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, we had bugger all. Just what we stood up in. And I can remember there was quite a few nurses with us too, and they were in the same boat. They just had their little handbags with them. Anyway, the Orchids was a pretty quick boat, and we took off and we stopped at Colombo, just a temporary stop, and eventually I run a bit of a book actually on the boat where we were going, and Australia was favourite. Odds on to Australia, but I had India and quite a few other places, and nobody had Java, so I had a bit of a skinner on most of that. But I think somebody had put Sumatra down, and I paid out on that one anyway. But I think for a couple of days we were in Tanjong Priok, and we were off, and in the middle of the night we finished up at a little place right down the bottom of Sumatra called Oosthaven, and I remember it was as black as hell and raining, and we had rope ladders from the boat to go down to a lighter that pulled up alongside, and I was pretty scaredy cats going down that because I can't swim, and I was thinking, Christ, if I fall off here I'll be buggered. Anyway, we eventually got on there and finished up at the wharf where there was a fair drop of panic. A British officer came there and gave us the news that we were supposed to be going to protect an aerodrome at Palembang Airport. We were supposed to be going out there to protect the airport from the Japanese coming down. And anyway, the officer told us that the Japanese had already taken the airport the day before, and there were about half a division or something was on its way, and they were only about, I forget what the figure was, it was only about somewhere around about 40 kilometres out of Oosthaven. So after much panic, and I always remember at the end of the jetty there were a lot of Pommy soldiers there driving anything that went. There were a few Bren carriers and some lovely cars, and they drove them to the end of the wharf and just bangs over the edge into the drink. You know, we got back on the Orchids in the black of night, and I remember that when first thing that happened was when we got up, they brought us out cocoa, I think it was, a cup of cocoa and a bicky or something, which I always thought was a good thing at the time. Anyway, we came back through the Sumatra Straits, finished up back in where we'd started off, Tanjong Priok.
Snow, can I just ask you one question about the Orchids? Hadn't it actually left the wharf, and it was when you were landed on the at Oosthaven?
Yeah.
The Orchids had already gone, hadn't it? And wasn't it retrieved, or was it beside the?
No, it's still in the same place.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. There was one thing I read at a later time. The chap that was in charge of the lighter didn't want to go back because of the storm. There was a lot of thunder and lightning going on, and one thing that happened was he decided he didn't want to try and find the Orchids in the dark.
Yes.
And he wasn't too keen on going, but I think he got the opportunity of going and following the other mob into the drink. But he eventually took us out because the lightning showed up just where the Orchids was, and we were very lucky to actually get back on it and get through the Sumatra Straits, because a few days after that is when the Perth, the Euston and the Tromp were engaged by an invasion force of the Japanese, and all sank. So actually we were a bit lucky to get through that.
Yes. When you were on Java eventually, you landed on Java eventually, were the Japanese already active in the area with their aircraft, or?
Yeah, our first, when we landed on the Java, our 14 platoon, we were given the job of supposedly going around the aerodrome. Comordian, I think, was the name of the aerodrome, and it had been had hell bombed out of it. All the runways had holes in where the Japs had bombed them, and there were multiple various planes there, all in bits and pieces. But there was one runway right up the end where the village was. That was still good, and apparently the landing light place, that was still mobile, because we'd been up one end of the airport, and Bill Mumps and Sandy and I, and we decided we'd leave that end and go down the other end where the village was, because we were thinking about sneaking into the village that night. Anyway, we just got down to the bottom end of the aerodrome, and a few Jap planes come over. Apparently they'd been out bombing somewhere and had a few left, and they bombed all the top end of the airport again. And I can remember looking up and seeing palm trees and flames and what have you a fair way up in the air from the bombs, and a few people got injured there, and they were lucky enough to get back to Australia. Actually finished up back in Australia, the ones that got injured. Our little sojourn for the night, we finished up, we hid our rifles and went in the village for a bit of R&R. Anyway, from there we finished up. Our commander Blackburn had told us that we were going up through Butonsville to, Christ, I've forgotten the name of the joint now. Anyway, he was given orders to hold a bridge, and I don't know how you pronounce it. I think it was Tinagin or Tinanjin or something, the river where this bridge was, and we had to hold that bridge for at least 2 days. Blackie he'd actually formed what was called Black Force, and there were 2nd, 3rd Machine Guns, 2nd Pioneers, I think it was 2nd, 1st Field Artillery, 101 Battalion of, I think they were Texans, Yank Artillery as well, and that was sort of our fighting force to engage the Nips up there. As usual, right up behind the 2nd Pioneers, the C Company had that was our front
Ford Company?
Ford Company, yeah, they were up forward as usual. We were on the right flank. We had quite a bit of mortar, Jap mortar came out. You could hear them coming across the river yelling and screaming. When they used to come across, it was a bit blood-curdling, but their mortar fire was pretty accurate. We lost quite a few people at that place, and I remember also 2 officers from the C Company were in a Bren carrier and went out on a reconnaissance, but that was the last. We never heard of them again, so we just don't know what happened to them 2 officers. They were no doubt killed anyway. But
what weapons did you have now? Were you resupplied with weapons?
No, I believe how we got our weapons, there was a hell of a pile of stuff on the wharfs in big containers that was on its, originally that was going to Singapore, and that was all left there. Blackie had complete authority apparently. They all finished up in big cars, all the officers. Blackie had a big thing, and we finished up with quite good. We had didn't have any no Vickers, but we had quite a few Brens. Hell of a lot of we all had 303s, Enfields, and we had mortars as well. So we were pretty well equipped there actually, and
When you refer to Blackie, you are referring to Blackburn, are you?
Oh, yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
And had he been promoted to brigadier by this stage, or was he still lieutenant colonel,
still lieutenant
in charge of your
Yeah,
battalion,
still in charge, yeah.
command of your battalion?
Still lieutenant.
Thank you.
And he, the only thing that I always remember, it wouldn't have mattered how good you were holding against the Japs there, that why they didn't send a plane, spotter plane over there. They could have knocked us off without any trouble if they'd have decided to have a dash that way, but luckily they didn't anyway. And we finished up there, still just fighting the same Japs. Quite a few of the Indonesians were getting around with the Jap flags, which apparently they'd dropped hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them everywhere, and coming along the mountain track that we were on, and they were pretty derogatory, I think, and we wouldn't have had too many of them on our side, but there were quite a few towards the end there that were dealt with, that they were pinged off.
How many occasions did you actually have joined in combat against the Japanese?
Oh, I can remember for at least 3 or 4 dawn raids when they came across, but the second Pioneers, they did a hell of a good job. One of the things that happened with the second Pioneers there, this bridge that we were supposed to be protecting, there are I forgot to mention too, that Blackie had told us, that the Dutch had told him no Japanese had landed on Java, which was, and we were still fighting them there, and they still told us that none had landed on Java. Anyway, getting back to the second Pioneers, very good unit. And this particular day there were, I think, 5 fairly small Jap tanks finished up on the bridge coming up from the south, and the second Pioneers engaged them, and with their boys' anti-tank rifles and their small arms and what have you, they did a very good job. They knocked a couple of the tanks out and killed a few Japs, but I've only read in later years some of the amounts of Japanese that were supposed to be killed in those few days' action there, and I think between the second artillery and our blokes and all the others, I think there was somewhere in over 500 Japs were supposed to have been killed just in that little bit of action around there.
Now, how many weeks was it before the capitulation took place on Java?
Not a hell of a lot. I don't remember in weeks. It seemed very, very short when the order came round. I know Brigadier Blackburn had a shortwave radio, I believe, trying to get through to Australia to get permission to fight on, but he didn't have any luck getting through, and I don't think it would have been permitted anyway. But apparently, I only read, of course, after the war, that when the signing of the surrender business on Java came, that Blackie was sort of honoured a bit by the takeover Japanese commanders and what have you. I believe he got a bit of a rap with the few of the force that he had as black force holding out as well as they did there.
Now, once the surrender or capitulation, whatever word you like to use, took place, how long were you on Java before you, and where were you before you moved to...
Well, the first actual Jap guards we saw was, I think, about 3 days after when we knew the capitulation was on, sort of, we were told to put all our small arms in heaps and leave everything was supposed to be done nicely and left there. All the bolts were taken out of the small arms and thrown into the jungle over the side. Any vehicles were put over the side of the mountain and down many hundreds and hundreds of feet below. So everything that was possible, was destroyed. But it was about, I think, 2.5 days before we actually saw any Japs that came, and then they brought some trucks up. We were taken to a place called Laley's, was our first camp, and that's where we began to know that things were going to be pretty difficult, because the language barrier was absolutely terrible, and somebody yelling at you all the time, and you didn't know what they were yelling about. And face slapping, of course, came in straight away. But the camp at Laley's didn't go too bad, and then we went to Garoot, I think was our next camp. We were billeted in an old school there, and actually it wasn't too bad there. The only work parties we went on was either to go out and get wood or food for the Japs, and I remember that the Dutch women on Java, had they had them in the army instead of some of the Dutch men, Java might not have had to capitulate. They showed a lot of guts, the girls. They used to come in between us as we were going up with our work party, and either giving her lollies or fruit or something like that, anything at all. And I've seen them belted and kicked, and they'd go down and they'd get up and they'd still be spitting like cats. They had a lot of guts, the Jap girls. We really liked them.
Dutch girls.
Dutch girls, yeah.
And when were you chosen to leave Java?
We went from Groot and finished up eventually in Bandung. We did not do anything else other than work parties for the Japs from Bandung too. Just trying to think how long we were there. Quite a few months, till I think the 9th of March 42 we became POWs, and it was around December that we left, actually went to Sukabumi, and the Japs gave us needles at Sukabumi. Just forget now what they were for, but anyway, there were quite a few needles, and a hell of a lot of stool inspections went there, and we knew then that we were going to be boarded somewhere or other, but we were told that we were going more or less to a holiday camp from there. That's how we were going to be treated.
Now, whilst you were on Java, were you aware of and did you see Lawrence van der Post?
I had heard the name, but I
you never saw him?
No, never saw him.
Okay, when did you first have contact with Major Bill Wern?
Bill Wern, now, I know when I had last contact with him. First contact, strange enough, Don Company and B Company never fraternised very much. I'm pretty sure he was with B Company.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that he wasn't part of your unit.
Yeah, I thought he was.
He was a bit of a mystery man.
Mystery man.
Yeah. No, well, don't worry.
I just can't remember first contact with him.
Do you remember the name of the vessel you left Java on?
Yeah, we left on the Orchides.
No, when you left Java to go to Singapore.
Oh, Oh, geez.
No, it doesn't matter if you don't recall.
I should recall that. God, they all had a pretty similar name.
Yeah, it was something Maru, but
Yeah. I just can't think of the.
Well, if we have a break off, we'll identify that.
Yeah.
And that was about a 3-day journey to get across to Singapore.
Oh yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I remember. We got on the train event after we left Sukabuma. We had a march and we were taken down to the station and we stopped at a place Kuala Lumpur, and which I reckon had the longest platform I'd ever seen in my life, because all the stuff the Japs wanted loaded on the train was all down that end, and we had to lug it all the way up this big long platform. And they had a hell of a lot of stuff that went on the train.
Is that right? You went to KL?
On the way, we stopped at KL.
But that would be going past Singapore to go up to KL.
Well, I'm sure it was Kuala Lumpur that had this long,
Mm.
and where we loaded all the stuff on the thing. And that, I can't remember it stopping anywhere else. That's the only stop I can
Okay,
remember.
well, let's go forward to Singapore, where you were for about 10 days before you moved on. 10 days to a fortnight?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and that's where there was the altercation between Wiri and Galligan.
Yeah.
And then you...
We were sort of Java Rabble when we lobbed there.
Yes.
They gave us the name of Java Rabble because we had no boots and little Jap appies and we had very bloody little of anything actually.
It was probably more appropriate to address to the HMAS Perth survivors because
they
had nothing.
The second, fourth too. Everybody was done up in full gear and beautiful army boots and everything on, and we were sort of hustled out. I think Wiri had quite a few altercations with Blackjack there about equipping us, but I think there was good farm road about Blackjack saying that he gave us green pumpkin and green wood, sent us off to the jungle as soon as he could. We were only there a little while.
Now, one thing I hadn't asked you, which is relevant to Java, your own battalion medical officer, Tim Godley, do you remember anything significant that he did while you were on Java?
No, I just can't remember Tim or any of the ones later. I can remember Wiri when they had a sports meeting at Bandon, and I remember the Ammonese were winning everything that was going on. They were a terrific mob, the Ammonese. They were the only people from the Dutch units that we got on with. The Monadonese from Celebes were all on the Jap side right from the start, but the Ammonese were the good fighting ones and good sports. And I remember they were winning everything, and Wiri decided he'd have a go in the hop, step and jump. He stripped down to his underpants and done a beautiful big hop, and halfway through the step all his privates are hanging out in mid-air as he did his hop, step and jump. Won by about a metre, I think.
Yeah, I don't actually understand what you were talking about there. So.
Yeah.
All right. So you're in Singapore and you're now going off somewhere. Did you know you were going to Thailand?
No. All we knew that we were going to this holiday camp that we were supposed to be having. You know. We had no idea, had never heard of a Burma railway or anything like that.
Well, what was your train journey like?
Train journey was pretty bloody terrible. We were in covered wagons. I think there were 50 odd of us to each wagon. Quite a lot of us with dysentery and malaria and what have you. Yeah, the Jap guards, they were Korean guards, were pretty strict. Occasionally they'd open the door and for somebody to urinate and let a bit of air in and what have you, but there was a hell of a mess in most of the things, and there wasn't too much food going around, of course. I don't know how many days, but...
Well, they say it was about 4 nights, 5 days,
4 nights,
the
5
total
days,
journey.
yeah.
But I'm sure that there were some variations on that.
No, see.
When you arrived in Ban Pong in Thailand, I understand that initially you were moved by truck, is that correct?
Yeah, we were lucky, we were the early ones, yeah. We were moved by trucks.
But that must have been a precarious journey anyway, being crammed onto the back of a truck, was it?
Yes, yeah, and there was no decent roads either. Most of them were pretty bad tracks.
Now, do you remember when you were moving up? Did you remember getting up to Kanchanaburi? Do you remember being stopped there at any time?
Can't remember. I don't remember Kanchanaburi.
Do you remember crossing a river on your route through to a place like Tarseo?
Konyu, I think, would be. Oh no, I did Konyu first, but Tarseo.
Tarseo was first.
Tarseo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we did.
Would it have been on a rickety bamboo bridge?
I'm just trying to think of the name of the place.
Well, that's Tardan.
Tardan.
Yeah. And then there were trucks waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah.
And they took you up as far as Tarseo, and then you had to start walking from there.
There again.
Have I got that about right?
That's pretty right. Yeah.
Now, what camps were you in when you were in that area?
Tarseo. I remember when we went up the next one to Konyu, where we stopped was sort of all jungle, and said, well, this is where we got to make a camp. And I was amazed that people from so many different walks of life, could know so much about. And at least some of the Japs did have a bit of knowledge. They told us how big things had to be and what have you, and we had no shortage of material because everything was made out of bamboo, all our huts and all that, and palm fronds and things for the roof, and I remember a guy, big red-headed officer.
Was he? What rank was he? Was he a major?
Captain, I think.
Jack Hands or?
No, it wasn't Jack. No, he wasn't one of ours.
Oh, right.
Truck.
A Major Woods?
No, he was I remember at Garuti, he had one of the schools teaching us drawing. But he was very good on regard when we were building those bloody huts at Konyu, this bloke. Anyway, we eventually finished up building a camp there. I forget the order that they went in. I think it was Jap's quarters. I don't know whether they were before the kitchen. Jap's quarters, kitchen, hospital, and then the other ranks, sort of, that were officers, and then the other ranks.
And was that Hintop Mountain Camp? Or?
No, this is still Konyu.
Still Konyu, right.
And we had that pretty well, and then instead of us staying there as we thought we were going to be staying there, we moved up to what became there. And the missus for us was either, we called it Hintop Jungle Camp or Hintop Road Camp.
Yep.
And that was probably the worst camp that we were in.
And that was the one that had a stream going through the middle of it?
Yeah.
And then there was the escarpment over the other side.
Over the other other side.
Yes.
We used to go through.
Uh-huh.
But that was a pretty terrible camp. It was our main work camp.
Yes.
And that's where we learnt then that the holiday camp had all been a bit of a big lie.
Yes.
And we found out that what our job from then on was to clear the jungle, put cuttings through the mountains and build a railway line.
Yes.
That was our...
And what work were you involved in yourself?
I was rock rolling. I was a rock roller. I was not big enough, strong enough and what have you to be on the hammer and taps.
Uh-huh.
And after the hammer and taps did their holes with the hammer and the drill that they used to hammer in, and somebody used to put the water in to unplug the stuff, get the muck out and what have you. But I was always pretty cautious. We had to wait until all the holes had the gelignite or dynamite in, and the Japs were terrible counters, and I used to always be frightened that after we used to count the number of explosions that went off, and always thought, you know, they might have not counted because they were terrible counters, but luckily we were it never came about that we were sort of had another one blow up while we were there. But we used to get the big ones, some of the bigger rocks, we used to have levers and what have you on, and a team of us would have the levers under and put over the edge and put them over the edge of the mountain. Some of the drops looked to be thousands of feet. I don't know how high they were, but you'd watch some of the big boulders going down, and I bet towards the end there'd be an avalanche down the bottom where they eventually got to. All the smaller stuff we shifted in little baskets, or we had rice bags with 2 bits of bamboo put through them to carry a bit more. 2 of you would have to carry that down and chuck that over. A lot of the smaller stuff was eventually used under the sleepers as ballast. We hadn't been very long doing this, and the rations were terrible, had very little besides rice, very watery, stewy stuff to go with it. It wasn't very long before dysentery, either bacillary or amoebic, came along. I was unlucky enough to be an amoebic chap, and I lost a hell of a lot of weight and became pretty thin, and had quite a few spells in hospital with that. But our losses were pretty big. But the thing that came along next, and the monsoons, I think went for damn near 3 months, and the rain bucketed down all the time, so we were working under difficulties right through. But one thing that really decimated our camp was the cholera, and in our mob alone I think we lost about 38 pretty quickly with cholera, which was a terrible bloody disease.
Where do you think they got the cholera from? Because it's a waterborne...
Yeah, we thought it had just was a natural thing that happened there, but we were told at a later date that the Japs had a commandeer. Commandeer is not the word anyway. They had a lot of Asian and
well, there were coolies working in that area.
Yeah, a lot of coolies that they had got working on the line, probably under false pretences of what they were going to had to endure, and they had sort of no organisation or doctors or people health-wise to tell them what to do and whereas we had big thunderboxes dug everywhere, and we knew every possible chance to wash your hands and things like that, and keep your dixies clean. And they didn't, and they used to defecate everywhere round about, and of course with all the water flowing here, there and everywhere, we were told that at a later date that it was probably causes of some of the cholera.
Now, as I understand it, there was an incident when you were very ill and you were on a medical inspection parade and Weary intervened. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I had been very, very bad with amoebic, and you get up with over 30 a day or something like that, 30 motions, but you're only passing sort of very little feces. It's mainly blood and mucus, and plain as hell with you. And a particular guard up there, who was known as the Lizard, nicknamed, he was responsible for sorting out the fit people for if Weary had to get so many men out for the day. Well, the Lizard was the chap that had to get the men there out, and I was on a single, what they call a single bed. We had single spaces in between the bamboo that we used to sleep on in the hut, so that if you died during the night, there'd be the orderlies that sort of take the body out, getting ready for being burned, and without interrupting anybody else, because sleep was pretty important if you could get any. Anyway, I was on this bed this morning. There was a lot of screaming and yelling outside, and apparently they were short on there, and the Lizard came in and with the butt of his rifle gave me a few bashes with that, and I crawled out from there and got outside, and Weary had a look at me and he said, "Sit down there and don't move." And he went over to this little Lizard, and I remember he put his hand on top of his head and he said, "This man is sick, he cannot go to work. Sit there slow and don't move." Which I did, and there was a hell of an argument between him and Weary for quite a while, and it was agreed that I would go on the what do we call the duties? Sick duties. You know, just a job around the camp for the day. I remember I was sent up to the Jap kitchen area for that day, and after the Japs had prepared their meal for their officers and what have you, they came back and they used to play up something dreadful on sake. They used to have a drink called sake, and used to get pretty drunk, and I used to have light a fire and warm the wood up to keep the water, and I used to have to pour the water over them. They had baths with like an 18-gallon keg cut in half. And the drunker they got, the more abusive they used to get, and screaming and yelling all the time. And I remember I was pouring water over this particular bloody Jap, and I said to him, "Itchy May Banjo, one man wanted to go to the toilet," and he looked at me and screamed and yelled, gave me a couple of cuffs, and I just peed, and I peed straight in the bath. Well, that started things going, and he and the other guy got out, and I got hell belted out of me and knocked out, and apparently I was just thrown in the mud just up from the camp. And that night, when the boys got back, and one of our chappies, Sonny Smith, came in and said where was Snow, and they said he'd gone up for light duties up to the kitchen area so he came up looking. He had a bamboo There was that creosote on the end. And that was our lights those days. And he came up and he found me there, but the Japs must have decided they were going to do a bit of blocking because I had a bamboo loop sticking out of my penis and a great bamboo knot around my little Jap happy up my bottom. And I was laying in the mud there, and I had come around, and I can remember laying there, and the only thought in my head was, thank Christ this is finished, because I was absolutely sure that that was my last day. But Sonny got me back and got me back on the bed up there, and I remember he washed me down and washed my Jap happy. And
Yeah. Was Sonny Smith Doug Smith by any chance?
No.
No. You know Dougie Smith?
Yeah. I know Dougie Smith, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Good mate.
Okay. Now there were three other doctors that came from Java with you. Major Moon.
Yes.
How long? Do you remember him being in the Hintok area?
Yes, I remember.
Do you remember him leaving?
Yes, he went up towards Tunkai, I think.
Yeah, back down. Yeah. And
Major Corlett.
Major Ewan Corlett.
I probably had more visits to Corlett than Weary, really. He did a hell of a lot of work. I was pretty near the major bloke as far as their dysentery unit was.
Well, see, he was the best person for it because he was a physician.
Yeah. He was a fabulous doctor. And
yeah. What was his nickname?
His nickname was the Gangster. He had a sort of a scar down one side of his face, and he was had a pretty good sense of humour. I remember when he actually saved my life with I had 2 hematine injections, and that was the only thing that would stop your dysentery. And I can remember that when he gave me this particular one, that he told me that they'd had set aside for Weary who had dysentery as well, but they apparently decided he had bacillary and not amoebic. And I remember after Corlett had injected me with the hematine, he patted my buttocks and told me I had so many hundred tickles, which was the Jap dollar those days, in my backside. But I always think in my mind that only through Corlett and the 2 hematine injections that I had that I would never have got through, even though my best mate ever, Gordon Roberts, looked after me like a mother up there. Practically every time I was in hospital, Gordon did all my washing down and washed my Jap happies, and anything he could scrounge anywhere that he'd bring me, such as a bit of gulwa or something like that. But he looked after me like a mother. And I remember one occasion when I was pretty near death, and he'd come in and told me that he'd put so much tickles in my canteen account, and I went crook at him, and he said, I'm working snow, he said, and the Japs, there's no work, no pay business, and he'd put his own money in.
Now Gordon is still alive today, isn't he?
Still alive today.
How's he going?
He's still #1 in my book.
Yeah.
He rings me once a fortnight and has a yarn, and always, but he's always got a good sense of humour, and he's finished up a very influential part of Dandaragan, very rich cocky these days, even for all my birthdays, and even like joining up fee to the machine gunners, I go to pay it and they say, no, that's already paid, Gordon's paid that.
That's lovely. Now, your battalion doctor, I know he got separated from you, but did you see him at any time when you're on the Burma-Thailand Railway? That's Tim Godley.
Tim, yes. My main recollection of Tim was when I was in a place on the Crow Isthmus, and it was a big...
Okay, now we'll come back to that.
Come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Snow, I think we'll have a little break, and we'll have something to eat, and then we'll get back to this.
Okay.
Now, Snow, we've stopped and had a little bit of lunch, and a beer.
I enjoyed.
Had a beer.
And Thai beer, which is lovely.
Yeah. And we're talking about Hintock River Camp. You were down there.
Yes.
Do you remember Corlett being down there?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Were you well when you were down there, or were you ill?
I was on the way back, but still, maybe dysentery was still keeping me not real well. But
yes.
I was a lot better down there than I was in the jungle camp.
Yeah. Now, would you have remembered a medical orderly down there by the name of Ray Denny at all?
Yes, I remember him,
Yeah.
Tasmanian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, you were telling us about fishing from the river when you're in that area. Can you just go into a bit of detail about that?
I remember Gordon said to me, you know, we'll have to pinch...
It's just a second, that's Gordon Roberts, your mate?
Yeah, Gordon Roberts. And he sort of was in charge of us four. He was our quartermaster. We said any sugar, bull or anything like that, with whatever money we could scrounge or pinch from any goods we could pinch anywhere, we always split, you know, with 4 ways between us. And Gordon was a hell of a good scrounger. He said to me, you know, things are getting pretty low, Snow, we'll have to organise something in the near future. And there was a little pommy bloke that I became very friendly with, and he had unravelled, he had a slab off a little 2-man tent. He'd taken all the thread off that, and he made a fishing line, and he had sort of bent wire stuff on the end of it. And I said to him, look, I've never ever fished in my life. He said, well, I'll make a line up for you and put a bamboo float on. He said, all you do is hold it, and when you see the float go down, just gently pull the line up. So I said to Gordon, well, I'll go down and see if I can catch a fish, and I'll do it very early in the morning. So I went down somewhere around about 4 o'clock in the morning and waited till the guard had walked past, the Korean guard for our section. So I snuck down the path, and I was sitting on the top of the bank there and threw this thing in, and I was watching the bamboo going up and down, and all of a sudden it went under, and I went like that and pulled in fish, and it weighed somewhere around about 3 pounds. It was a lovely big thing. I took back to Gordon and said, you know, this should be right. This will go well with the rice. And he said, no, what we'll do, we'll go down the officers' quarters and pick someone up down the officers' quarter and see if we can get some money for it. And eventually he goes down to the officers who were down the furthest one away from us. They were more or less parallel with the way the river ran. And he got onto an officer there who turned out to be a pommy officer called E.W. Swanton, who was a cricketing name from way back, I find out later in life.
A commentator.
Commentator,
yeah.
Oh. And he sort of lived for cricket. And anyway, Gordon offered it to him, and he got about $3.50 or something like that for it, whatever it was. It was like winning the lotto as far as we were concerned. So Gordon bought salt and gulba from traders and what have you that we were allowed to go down to the river to see at the bottom camp, in the Hintock River camp. And it was one of the better things that happened to me during my PRW days.
Yeah.
In very much later life, one of the test series, E.W. Swanton came out, and I found out he was at the Criterion Hotel. So I went into town, made myself known to him and asked him did he remember, and he said he remembered it well and he thought he got a very cheap buy.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Yes, that was quite good.
Now, do you remember anything that...
Also at Hintop Camp, I remember one of the Koreans there, very big for a Korean. I think he was about 6'2" or something. We called him Aussie Joe, and he was one of the best of the Korean guards ever. He was very good and spoke damn good English, and he was always telling us all sorts of things that we thought, God, fancy him telling us this or that. And we reported. I actually told Corlett, and Corlett said he's probably a Jap spy, Snow. So we were a bit canny with this bloke, but I think he was thinking, he more or less said that the bloody war was something he didn't want to get into, and he was just shanghaied there, and that was it.
Yes, yeah.
But he seemed a hell of a good bloke. Yeah, so out of all the Koreans, he was definitely my favourite bloke, Aussie Joe.
Now, when you're in Hintop River camp, were there any trains running on the line at any time then?
Oh, to be quite honest, I'm not sure.
No, because the Hintop River camp was only about quarter of a mile from the railway.
I was trying to think now. I imagine that's where that would be. I can remember going up to the line, and these trucks had stopped there, and there were quite a few injured soldiers. Jap soldiers had got off there, and I don't know what the name of the joint was, but it would not have been far from camp. I can remember that we had stopped there because our guards wanted to have a yarn with their mates, I suppose, and I can remember a few of our blokes taking their water bottles, going over, and giving these bloke a drink, and I used to say that's the last bloody thing I would do, but I can remember that as plain as anything.
Yeah,
they were coming back from Burma. So
yeah, well, that might have been later and further down the river, further down the line. Yeah, but I'm familiar. I think you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, I do. I just thought of that. I don't know what part of that was in. But
Do you remember maybe the first train that went up the line? Were you aware of the line being finished and the trains going through?
Just trying to think. Not particularly. No, Pete.
Well, when did you leave, say, the Hintok area and go down to
I think we went to Tarso first.
Yes, down to Tarso. You went down there by barge, didn't you?
Yeah, we went down by barge.
How many would have you been on the barge?
Oh, I think from our hut there was 20 odd.
Yeah.
There were few of us on stretchers, not many.
And that was that a barge being pulled by another boat, or how did it go down?
I think it went down with the one out in front.
Yes. Yeah, one like towing.
Yeah, towing.
Yeah. And Tarsau was a big camp.
Yeah, that was. It was bigger than when we first went through there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where you had contact with some British doctors, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, I had British doctors there.
Do you remember their names?
No, it could have been one called Madison, I imagine. Yeah.
Were you ever aware of Weary Dunlop being in that area? Or an Australian doctor by the name of Marsden? Or?
No, I can't remember there. Actually, I didn't stay in Tarso that long.
Okay, and then when you shifted from Tarso, where did you go to?
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Well, did you go to Tamakan or?
No, I'm just trying to think of Tamawang.
Tamawang, yes.
Tamawang.
Yeah.
Because I know that the camp after Tarso was like heaven.
Yes.
Because food was so much better.
And did you go from there by train, or how were you moved down there?
I think we went in trucks. I think.
Yes.
From Tarso.
Yeah.
We didn't although I apparently must have been reasonably still sick, because I was went straight into the hospital at Tamarine, and that's where I was with Dougie, the other Doug Smith.
Doug Smith.
And Snow Golding. We were all in Tangawang together. That's where my favourite little Scott doctor, he used to say, "Snow, you're looking very peaked. I'll have to give you a few more duck eggs today." And he'd look at Smithy and say, "You're looking pretty good, Smithy. Get yourself a broom and go out and sweep up some of the leaves and things around the hospital." Many years later at our reunions, Doug used to come up and say, "You're looking a little peaked today. A few more duck eggs for you." Yeah.
Did Temawan have a moat around it?
Yeah, I suppose you called it a moat. No water.
Well,
no.
Yeah, no, it was like a pit. A pit.
Yeah,
thing.
a pit. Yeah.
And a wire fence.
Right, yeah.
Wire fence. Yeah.
Machine guns in the corner.
Yes. Yeah.
We made an escape plan there, thinking about 4 or 5 of us. We reckon that if it come to trying to get out of the place, we were still sure at some time or other that there had been an invasion or something of some sort.
Yeah.
And we'd try and dodge the machine gun and get out. We were going to get ourselves locked up in a Thai jail. That was our way of being our escape. Never had come, thank Christ for that.
Now, you must have been ill when you were in that camp.
Yeah, I was.
Now, Corlett was in that camp too, wasn't he?
Yeah, Corlett was there.
But Weary wasn't?
No, didn't see Weary there. No.
Now, from there, you moved to Non-Competent, did you?
Non-Competent, yes. Yeah, I think that was our next stop.
That was the huge hospital camp.
Very big hospital camp.
Did you ever see the Red Cross come in and inspect anything at that hospital?
No.
Were you aware of Colonel Coates being the senior officer?
Yes. I remember some of the stories of Coates.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember that never got any hidings or bashings or anything there.
No.
The Competent things.
Well, the huts were quite good, weren't they?
Yeah, they were quite good.
And plenty of water?
Plenty of water, and that's where I finished up. On parade this day, and the Japs called out that they wanted 2 carpenters. That's where Jim Morgan, one of my Moora mates, put his hand up straight away and said, "Put your hand up, Snow, I'll carry you, I'll tell you what to do."
Yeah.
So I became a carpenter, and we were on call, did all sorts of jobs, mainly there. The little bridge had been blown down and they had the engine on one side. And we were making little trolleys with wooden wheels and things. And
Now, can I just ask you, where are we now? Or?
Yeah, this was out in the Competent.
Out of the Competent, thank you.
I can't think of the name of the little village, but it was somewhere near the train line.
Yes.
Because where this bridge had been blown out, and the thing that they used to wheel across from the trains was bags and bags and bags of sulphur. I don't know what the Japs were doing with it. But
Now, was that between Non-Competent and Bangkok, was it, on that side?
I thought it was the other side.
Was it? No?
Going back towards Singapore.
Yes, yeah.
Going back towards Singapore.
Far, no.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of that village there.
Now, when... so you're sick and you're in Non-Competent.
Yeah.
Markovich was in that camp. Do you remember him being
I
there?
had my legs, so I didn't have to worry about going to him.
No. When were you chosen to go down to...
we did a few...
Champong, was it?
Yeah, Champong. We went out on quite a few little sorties where they'd want 20 or 30 men, and usually it used to be in the middle of the night or early morning, you know, and they'd get you out on these little jobs. I remember going out on one with a mate of mine, Elliot McMaster. He was in the same mob in this day, and I think Kinghorn was with us too. We went out to where there'd been a derailment, and these trucks had run off the line, and there were quite a few people, you know, that had been injured, or I think there were a few killed there as well, but we had the job sort of getting all the stuff back on the line, which was pretty hard physical labour, but we had to get the stuff all back on the line and get it mobile again.
Now, Snow, Elliot McFast Master was a... Elliot was a... This is him here, isn't it?
That's him.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll just see if we can get that on the screen.
Very, very good chap.
And he was the 2nd 20th Battalion, was he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very good chap.
Mhm.
I visited him quite often when I came back. I don't think we went, or there were the same, I don't know how many there would have been, quite a big mob of us went. We went to Petbury for a little while, but we went from Petbury to Champon, and I don't know, there's hundreds and hundreds of us there, because the marshalling yards at Champon, they were very, very big. Hell of a lot of traffic went through there. They also had a big round turntable there. You could turn the engines around there as well. And apparently the Allies knew that it was a pretty good place as far as the Japs were concerned for their war effort, so they came under a hell of a lot of bombing. I remember also about this time, or I'm not too sure it was here or February, where we saw this single plane come over this day, and of course the work party stopped and looked up, and we saw what looked like a swarm of bees leaving the plane. We saw all this stuff, and as it got further down we could see it was pamphlets that were floating through the air.
Uh-huh.
And the Japs hustled us up and whizzed us back to camp, and we hadn't been back in camp very long when a lot of bits of bamboo with pamphlets inside them were thrown over the fence to us.
Uh-huh.
I had one for quite many years.
Uh-huh.
They were about 8 inches long and about 4 or 5 wide. They were on orange paper with a black border. They had Germany has surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, and then in big letters, Japan now stands alone.
Uh-huh.
That was the wording on it.
Really? Yeah.
And that, because we thought, oh well, the end of the bloody war just about, you know. Instead of that, we had about another 9 months to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can remember that plain as day, that plane going over. Also, after the initial bombings at Champon, the Japs brought out an order and said that no prisoner of war would ever stray more than 1 metre from the nearest Japanese guard during an air raid.
Uh-huh.
And some wag yelled out, how the hell could we get near them? They can run faster than us. Yeah.
Now in Champon, this is a long shot, there was a 2nd 10th Field Regiment fellow, a Queenslander by the name of Morris Underwood there. You wouldn't have known him?
No, Underwood rings a bell, but in my mind's eye...
red-headed fellow. What about Tim Godley was down there with you too?
Yes, Tim was the only doctor or the only officer I know on the whole of the Burma Railway that led a work party out on the tie line.
Yes.
And I remember the little group of us that he took out, there were only about 20 of us, so I think we must have been light sick or something. The Japs wanted these particular railway lines shifted from A to B, and I always used to try when we were carrying the railway lines to get in between two taller blokes so
Yes.
I could have a bit of a ride.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember that after a few, we were carrying these lines and dropping them alongside. We were replacing this line, and this particular damn line got down, and there was a stone apparently, and it hit, and it jumped over and ran right across my big toe, blood spurting up in the air, and I'm yelling and screaming blue murder, and I don't know how I was going to hop back, but I was screaming and yelling I'm going to hop back to camp and what have you. And old Tim came over, Dr. Godley came over, and he said, Snow, lie down there and yell and scream and put blood all over yourself. He said, and as soon as I can get onto the Jap, I'll explain that you've got to be carried back to camp. So he said that'll give two blokes a rest for a while. So he organised that, and
Yeah.
I was carried back to camp. And I think he put a couple of stitches in something anyway, but I've only got a little scar there now and still
Yeah.
got my big toe.
Yeah.
So old Tim always gets a very good mention in my memory.
Yes.
He was a fabulous bloke.
Now, do you remember the day the war ended? Is there anything else you want to tell us about Champong?
No, except that another time we had pamphlets dropped to us was to tell us to don't be within a few hundred yards of the line because they were going to strafe the line. And I can remember that we were quite a few hundred yards off and underneath a house that was on stilts sort of, and I was with a bloke called Bluey Cairns from Nungarran on that particular day. And
What unit? Was it your unit?
Yes. And the people, as usual, arguing about this, that and the other, and arguing about Freemasonry and about being dressed in pyjamas and riding goats and what have you. And Bluey gives me a dig in the ribs and he says, Snow, all bullshit, mate. Don't listen to it, Snow, don't worry about it. And that was the first, I'd ever heard of Freemasonry, even though my grandfather was founding member in Moora. I found out at a later time. But I always remember that during one of the raids.
Was there something that flowed on from that after the war?
After the war, I was working for the co-op for many years, and I was in Wild Catching Co-op, and I got a ring from Bluey. He had a drapery shop in Narrabeen, not a drapery shop, he had a whole big shop in, the only shop actually in Nungarran. And he got his books in the hell of a mess, and I'd taken a bookkeeping course up to the trial balance as one of my rehab things. And Blue said, can you get up here and try and sort things out, Snow? And I asked my boss there, could he get, someone else in the meantime? Anyway, I got 3 months relief from my job at Wiley to go up and help Blue. And oh God, his books were in a mess. And those days they had a big camp at Nungarran.
Yes, an ordnance camp.
Ordnance camp there, and all the clients from there didn't have dockets, they had little books, and everything went in little books and what have you, but doing his accounts and all that, and I'd be going through and working out. He'd say, pick all the little ones out. And anyway, some of the bigger ones, and I'd say, look, they're bloody well overdue, Blue, you've got to get this organised. So I'd give it to him, and he'd say, well, we won't sign that one, and he'd send 2 or 3 cheques away unsigned. So they'd go down, they'd give him another week to get more money in the kitty. so old Blue, yes, finished up with a good old mate. But I did a bit of work for him. Yeah.
Anyway, we were going back to talk about the day the war ended, and you were with him, and I'm sorry
That's all right. We came back from Champong, and we had one stop on the way back, and it was just about where the Murgui line was going out.
Yes.
Somewhere around about there where we stayed the night on the way back from Champong.
Yes.
To going to Petchaburi, Petburi, I think it might be. And
that might have been Kirian Khan by...
Yeah.
You don't recall.
And I can remember at the stop, and there was a big open truck came up, and it was full of women. Full of women going towards Bangkok. I was So we knew bloody well, you know, that the end must be pretty near then. And there were some Australians, but mainly Dutch, I think they were. They were all going back ahead of us. Anyway, when we got back to Petchenbury, and we got back pretty late, and I can remember it was somewhere around about 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and it was the 28th of August, and this chap, we could hear him walking up the middle of the line on the ballast there. Somebody said, "Jesus, don't tell me they got another bloody work party for us this morning." And I looked up and I see Major Billy Wern coming towards us, and he had a Tommy gun across his shoulder, a bloody holster and a revolver on the hip. Came up to tell us that the officers assembled in Bangkok had sent him out to tell us that the war had finished, and for Christ's sake, don't do anything stupid or anything like that. That they would get us home just as soon as they could. They would get us down to Singapore, and he said, "You'll find that the Americans have got planes coming in dropping supplies and what have you," which they did, but we had to go out to, I think it was about 11 kilos or something. It was a fair sort of walk. I remember we had to go out and do a few little tidy up jobs at the airport.
Airfield.
To tidy that up before they came in, but the early planes just came in and dropped
supplies.
bloody great bags of stuff. I had nearly 2 days stopping with Yanks in little bivvy tents. And I remember asking if they had like tinned fruit, and I can remember eating tinned fruit which went straight through, and I said, "What about some tomato sauce?" because I was a fan, and I can remember drinking out a bottle of ketchup, as they called it, and that went straight through too. And a Yank major stood on a box there, I can see him now, and he said, "I'll have every American soldier out of this place within 2 days." And he did.
They did, yeah.
The Yanks were first to go.
Yeah, they were flown out.
They were flown, then the Pommies.
Then the Bruts were flown out to Rangoon.
Yeah.
And then how did you get out of
Well, six of us, I went down with malaria again.
Yeah.
And we were on stretcher case.
Yeah.
It took 6 of us in the DC-3 Dakota. And we had an Aussie crew too. And they skylarked going down. I can remember them saying, "See all them clouds over there, you know, you get chucked around if you go in them." And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, we just got through it and get over there. But anyway, they did it. And then they went down to the little places, little cays on the ocean and that, where there were palm trees and things. And they flew low over that. But it really gave us a scenic tour.
When you were in that airfield camp, there was a Perth, West Australian 2nd, 4th man there by the name of Jack Sherman. Did you? Sherman. Did you ever know him?
I just trying to think of 2nd, 4th there. Peter Moat would be one, I think.
Yeah, Jack Sherman's still alive down in Manjimup.
Oh, is he? Yeah. No, I don't know him.
Yeah. So you were flown down to Singapore?
Flown down.
Were you put into hospital when you got into Singapore?
Yeah, I went straight to hospital.
So did you end up having nurses looking after you?
It was beautiful. The gear we got up at Petchenbury wasn't too bad either, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, for getting out of a Japapi into good gear again was quite good.
Yeah.
The thing I remember most about Singapore is I think I was only in hospital for about 3 days, and Gracie Fields was there, and she put on a concert, and just before she was to come out on stage, bloody tropical storm came out, and we had lightning and thunder and rain pouring down, and she arranged, she got every vehicle within range of the place, because we had no electricity, everything got knocked out, and she had all the lights shining on the stage, and she went out and the old troopers carry on, and she did all her acts, still went through the night. We just sat in the rain and watched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't mind?
Didn't mind. No.
And how long were you in Singapore before you were brought home?
Not very long. I think about 10 or 12 days only in there.
And what vessel did you come home on, or did you fly home?
No, I came back on a boat. Jesus, fancy forgetting the name. I thought of it just a while ago.
Wouldn't be the Mananda?
No, double name. God, bugger me. Highland Brigade.
The Highland Brigade? Yes, Highland Chieftain, wasn't it?
Highland
Brigade, I think. Yeah.
I just thought of Highland.
Yeah.
I just can't think of the other name. It's two names. I think Highland was the first name.
Yes. And that came through Fremantle?
Came straight to Fremantle. And I can remember when we got to Fremantle looking out, and I saw a lady walking around with a big sign saying Fairclough, Lila and Mum. And then when we got off and eventually got to them, another cousin of mine, Laddie White, I won't say, I'll tell you after what I did earlier. Laddie was there and he became a copper during the war. He didn't join up, he became a policeman because he had a relation that was a bureaucrat at the time and got him the job. And he had borrowed Belle Gladstone, who was a hat specialist or something in town, and she had a bloody great big black Buick. And Laddie had got the Buick off Belle, so I went back in the Buick that day, and Laddie had got that organised for me. Yeah, so that was my welcome home party. My mother and my two cousins.
And what about your date of discharge? What was that?
So I got out in January 1946.
Yes, yeah. And what did you do after the war, Snow?
Well, I vowed and declared I wasn't going to do anything until I spent my deferred pay.
Which was a lot of money.
$386 or something.
Enough to buy
quid. Yeah.
Enough to buy a house in those days.
Yeah. Anyway, a few of us, particularly two, Snow Golding and Sonny Smith and I, decided that it didn't matter where we were, we would always meet at the races on Derby Day, which we managed to do for 12 or 15 years. And wherever we were, we met on Derby Day. And I did nothing for quite a while, and then I decided that I'd go into carpentry, and my dad was a wheelwright by trade, and we had a blacksmith shop in Moora, and Dad made all the drays, wagons, sulkies and all that sort of stuff. And I was still pretty crook. I was having a hell of a lot of nightmares and things, and getting malaria pretty often. And Dad said to me, "You're mad, get yourself a job where you're going to be inside, not out on the weather and all that, building bloody houses." So I decided, I rang the guy in charge of the cooperative movement, and he got me to buy a book called Charters Advanced Accounts.
Yes.
Which was about 4 inches thick, I remember. And I had a bit of a thing because I did a bookkeeping course in Garut, actually.
Yeah.
Nearly up to trial balance with one of our chaps called Jim Law. And I thought, well, I've done that much, so I should have a bit of a start on this bloody bookkeeping business. So then I did another one, and I took that up to trial balance. And then I had a chance of a job with the co-op movement in Wildcatcham. I got there about 6 o'clock in the morning, had a look around, no bugger to meet me or anything. I thought, shit, when's the next train out of this place? Anyway, eventually I stayed there for quite a few years, got myself a girlfriend and finished up getting married there in Wildcatcham. So, and I had about 16 or 17 years, I think, in the co-op movement. I went to Querding, and then even though I was only a bookkeeper, I had a big accountant over my office at Yeelring, at the co-op at Yeelring. And eventually when I I finished up having 4 boys and decided that Ullin wasn't a very good place for the kids to grow up, so we decided to come to Perth. Had a bit of trouble getting into what I wanted to get in Perth, trying to become a bureaucrat, and I finished up getting myself a job with Coventry Motors in spare parts, which was how I got that job. I don't know.
Hay Street, Perth.
Yeah, in Hay Street, yeah. And I finished up there for about 19 years with Coventry Motors. Finished up at initially the Cannington office with a very good boss called Norm Ladner, and I worked there until I retired in 1980.
And Snow, what age are you now?
I'm 91 and a half, just about.
And your birthday?
28th of August.
You're just past it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Snow, is there anything else you would like to record about your POW experiences, or?
I'd like to say that I owe my life mainly to Corlett and his Hematine injections.
Yes.
And Gordon Roberts for his looking after me like a mother on the railway.
Yep, I understand that. Well, Snow, thank you. I regard it as a privilege to have you as a friend and to have had this interview today.
Yeah, it's taken a while.
During this interview with Snow, it started with him doing recruit training in Northam, just out of Perth in Western Australia. He went across to Woodside in South Australia to do further training, then back to Perth. At that point he boarded a vessel, the Ile-de-France, and he moved to the Middle East in this direction into the Suez. He was involved in fighting in Syria against the Vichy French, and then in the end of 1941, early 42, they were moved back and they thought that they were returning to Australia, but in fact they went into the southeast coast of Sumatra at a place called Oosthaven, where they attempted a landing, but that was aborted because the Japanese were already in the area. Then they were moved over to Jakarta on the island of Java, where they were landed. It was in this location in March 1942 that he became a prisoner of war. Following that, later in the year, he moved with Lieutenant Colonel Dunlop as a member of Dunlop Force. They went to Singapore and then went by vessel by train through to Thailand. He worked on the Burma-Thailand railway, and after finishing the railway he was then moved, and I'm just going to another map, he was moved to the southern part of Thailand. Excuse me, I'll just go to yet another map. Here we are here. This is Malaya down here. At the bottom of the map there is Thailand, or then known as Siam, and over on the coast here is Burma. Bangkok is around here, and Snow was moved down through a place called Phetbury, which will appear in his, will be heard in his interview, past a place called Kirian Khan, and down to this area here called Champphon. That is where he was at the end of the war. Subsequently he was moved back to Phetbury and worked for a short period on a railway, on an airfield there. So that is a brief summary of the locations that Snow was in during the war, and this interview was done on the around the 28th of November 2011.